Hello, and welcome to the Polk Pioneer Oral History Program, a collaboration between the Polk County Historical Association's Heritage Partners, the Polk County History Center, and Polk Government TV. I'm Angela Rosado with the Lake Wales History Museum, a heritage partner of the Polk County Historical Association. Thank you for joining us today as I have the pleasure of interviewing Mr. Bill Redmon, who has been nominated for Polk Pioneer recognition by the Lake Wales History Museum. Mr. Redmon, congratulations and thank you for joining me today. Let's begin with your story and your childhood memories. So as we know, you did not get your start in Polk County as a lot of pioneers before you. So tell me about your beginning and then how eventually you transitioned in your journey to Polk County.
Well, my father was a minister and I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. Lived there for the first 5 years of my life, and then we moved to Indiana a couple 2 or 3 years. I started school in Indiana, moved to Missouri for 1 year, but my formative years were more in Springfield, Illinois. So I went through the rest of my elementary school, middle school, and started high school in Springfield. And then my dad was asked to come back to the Atlanta area to be president of a small college. And so we came with him, and that began my personal significant involvement with Polk County. Okay. Even though my mother's family had moved to Florida, so we had come down to visit them, and I remember in 1948 coming into Polk County to visit what had just been started was Lake Aurora Christian Camp. Okay. Out east of Lake Wales in the middle of nowhere, and I can remember that visit very, very distinctly. But then in my high school years, my father would always come to Florida to help in that camp in their high school camps. So we would come. So I started going to camp there each summer. So I did that 10th, 11th, 12th grade. And it was, that became very formative, which put me on a path that eventually brought me back to Lake Aurora, because one of the purposes of those Christian camps in those days was to encourage people to go into specialized Christian work. And I can remember in my 11th grade, I made a very intentional decision that I wanted to go into ministry. Okay. And that was made at Lake Aurora, and that set the course for my life. Yeah. It eventually, to my spouses, to everything, was set one night around a campfire. Yeah. In Lake Wales at the Lake Aurora. So that got me started, and then I went on, prepared myself through my college. It was interesting. I did well in math in high school. All my teachers already had me scholarships for Georgia Tech.
I'm jealous of you. I wish I was like that. I'm the other brain version.
So, but I remember, I remember them crying. One of them crying to my mother, because I mean literally crying because I was wasting my life. So that's okay.
You proved her wrong, didn't you?
Well, you know, Georgia Tech's a great school, and I'm happy. You know, but that wasn't where I was being led. Right. So, but then I started a church in the Atlanta area, and then that was a young church, and then I got a call from a church in Tampa to ask to come to be their pastor, and so I went to Tampa. And that put me back in the Lake Aurora area again. So it's where our teenagers came to camp, and we'd come over and do volunteer work at Lake Aurora. I started directing some of the programs because we used all volunteers, and got into leadership, volunteer leadership. And that, we were a growing camp, and we were all volunteers, and we knew we just couldn't do it with volunteers. And so we said, we've got to hire somebody to help us go year-round. We didn't know where to find anybody, and eventually, because I had a background in it, they asked me if I would come. I had no background in running a camp, didn't know what that was about, but I knew I liked working with young people. I knew that was my gift set.
Yeah.
So, and I tended to think out of boxes. So the camp gave me the freedom to do that. And so I came, and it was a great ride. I stayed at for 34 years. So that got me into Polk County in 1972. And I haven't left. Don't plan to leave.
It's beautiful. And we know that you also had ties to Polk County before you even know it as well, through your spouses and through your family. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, my first wife, who passed away in '99, was named Margaret. And I first met her as a camper at Lake Aurora when I was a camper. She was a year behind me. But she was born in Lake Wales. Her father was minister of the First Christian Church in Lake Wales at that time. But her mother's mother was a teacher at the Summerlin Institute. Her name was Effie Forsyth, and the only reason I know that because she was featured in the little book Peace River Pioneers in 1896, had her picture in there. So she married a Methodist traveling minister, so then they traveled the state, started a number of churches. It was the Blackburn family. Okay. And so the Blackburn family, very significant within Methodism and Florida Southern College and things like that. So, yeah, so we have that tie-in to so while I don't have those Polk County roots, my children do have those Polk County roots.
That's beautiful. I love that. I know that you have, again, you hopped all around to a few different schools in your early years, but tell me a little bit about those impactful moments during your school years that, again, I know you mentioned the one with your teacher, but maybe some other things that led up to where you are now and what led you into your career.
Okay, let me go back to my years in elementary school. I attended a school that was kind of on the wrong side of the tracks. It was the poorest school in the city. In Springfield, nearly every school had a gymnasium. Basketball was big up there, indoor recreation in the wintertime. Ours was a school that did not have one. And we were, on one side of our school was a garbage dump. On the other side was a community where all the garbage men lived and their families. So they were my friends. And but this was in the period when polio was really rampant within the country. Okay. And I had a friend named Marvin who wore braces on both of his legs. And I can very distinctly, we'd go to school and Marvin would always want to run. Now Marvin couldn't run very fast. He always wanted to run. And so, you know, I just developed that friendship, and I did not realize at the time that that was going to affect what I did later.
Beautiful.
But I'll never forget that. And I know we just went through the quarantine just recently, but for me, back in those days, we were quarantined. We couldn't leave our property. We couldn't go to church. We couldn't go to the movies because polio was just spreading. It was the only way they could stop it. And I've lived long enough to see us put men on the moon, but that means nothing. The greatest thing to me was when they gave you something you just drank and it cured polio, kept you from getting polio, rather. I thought, wow, I mean, if you've ever seen people living in iron lungs, it's just like, it's amazing what, you know, to get past that.
Yes.
And so those things affected me. It made me appreciate the underdog. Living the garbage man, it was like when my teachers in school would say, hey, if you don't start doing better, you're just going to wind up being a garbage man. I'm thinking, what's wrong with being a garbage man? Exactly. They're my friends. And so that did affect how I probably viewed things, and I didn't realize it at the time.
Right, right. And that leads into how your work history began. So let's go from the camps when you got hired there. Let's lead into that history a little bit and learn more about that transition and how eventually you got into Wild Creek and then all of the great things that you're going to be moving on forward into.
Well, when I came to Lake Aurora, within the educational system that I went in, including my college, there were no classes in the field of Christian camping. In the secular colleges, they put it in the fields of recreation. But within the church community, it was Christian education, and it was a whole different direction. And so I had to go and try and find how to do these things, which I was able to do. But locally, I remember coming to the camp, and we had 3 canoes at Lake Aurora. They were never used. We played volleyball, we played softball, and we went swimming, and that was the end of recreation. Yeah. And swimming, maybe they had a lifeguard and maybe they didn't.
Right.
But those canoes just sat there. So when I came to Lake Aurora, I thought, well, we ought to be using those canoes. And I didn't have a strong paddling background, but I'd paddled somewhat. So I started paddling the Peace River. I was paddling, learning to judge my times and distances, and gaining a lot of experience. And then I said, well, we need more canoes. Mm-hmm. So we bought some more canoes, and I started running canoe trips on the Peace River. I once paddled from Polk County all the way to Boca Raton.
That's amazing.
To attend a convention just to highlight paddling. But so I became proficient in that particular field. And but those programs were new, because most Christian camps, you played volleyball, you played softball, and you went swimming.
Right.
And when you were running a canoe trips, that was out of the mold. That was out of the mold of the traditional Christian education. Mm-hmm. And but what I discovered through that, and through running these canoe trips and developing overnight canoe trips, was, you remember, the purpose is to try and help that young people deal with the real issues that are facing their lives. And in your traditional camp, just like in their traditional school, they'd learn to manipulate the system. Mm-hmm. But you get them out on the riverbank, and it's raining, and you can't start a fire, and you begin to see the real person coming out. Yeah. And now you know where that person's really at, mm-hmm. and you can begin to do the real work. A humorous story. I had one of those trips was for a young adult Sunday school class. They wanted to do a couples canoe trip. Oh goodness. Oh, it was awful. It was like halfway through it, I had to stop and get them on the shore and start doing team building things with them to get them communicating to each other again. Yep.
You took them out of their element, the normal everyday.
Oh yes, it's I've actually even written, the only book I've ever written, but it's never been published, is called Paddling Upstream, and it deals with the lessons that I learned, because I would learn to put the group in upstream, and they'd have their own leadership. There's no way they could go. The river only goes one way. Right. I'd go down to the end and paddle back up and meet them where we were going to camp. Mm-hmm. And so on those paddles back up, I realized, whoa, I'm seeing different things than I do when I paddle downstream. And so I developed a whole life lessons based on paddling upstream. But I remember one of those times I was paddling upstream, and I could hear this yelling up ahead of me, and cursing, and it was bad. And I come around the corner, and here comes a family that's got a dad, a mom, and a son, all in a canoe. Now the son is in the back, steering it, but not steering it. The mother's in the front, yelling because they keep running into the shore. When you run in the shore, there's all the willows, and every time you hit the willows, spiders drop in your lap.
Oh no.
And so she's yelling, he's yelling, and the dad, this is an example of how not to be a dad, he's sitting in the center on a cooler, no paddle. He has a bandolier on filled with beer cans.
Oh my goodness.
And he's just sitting there, and this is what I encounter, and they're all yelling and screaming at each other.
He's not helping at all.
Not at all. But the lesson I took away from that is, if your mission is to go downstream, it doesn't matter. You're going to get downstream because water's going to take you that way. If your mission's to go upstream, you have to be intentional. And that's the lesson I took away from that. Yeah, that's the world. The world, they don't care. You're going to get downstream.
Exactly.
If you want to go upstream, you got to be intentional.
Right. So that Wild Creek Adventures led you to do so many wonderful things, and then you kind of led into founding the Camp Friendship, and then that led you into removing the barriers. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Okay. Well, let me. I kind of digress there. Wild Creek Adventures. After my first wife passed away, I remarried in '01, and Wendy, my new wife, came from a corporate training background. She lived in Clearwater. She was born in Miami, lived in Clearwater, went to USF. Excuse me. She had written, co-authored a book on how to make presentation skills. So she was a corporate trainer, trained Cargill. I mean, she trained a lot of companies, the high-level executives. And once I met these people, and I realized, whoa, their skill set, I assumed their skill set was way in another zone. I realized their skill set was not in another zone. That our skill set, even in these camps, was a very good skill set. So that's when I felt like with my canoeing, I wanted some big canoes that I could put a lot of people in, and I needed a way to pay for them. So I started a team building business called Wild Creek Adventures to have a way to pay for those. And I did it through corporate training by working with these corporations and team building. Sometimes I used a canoe, sometimes I didn't. And I still do that. I still do that with the Lake Wales Chamber of Commerce. I do their Leadership Lake Wales opening and closing retreat.
That's fantastic.
So I still do a little team building.
Good.
So that's the Wild Creek Adventures side. And then moving from Wild Creek Adventures, once I got those canoes, well, in 2000, I joined a Rotary Club, which I think may come later in this, but I joined a Rotary Club in 2000 because I was in my grieving process, and some friends taught me to go to it. I saw the club I joined was hands-on in running a camp for boys. Well, that fit me. I knew how to do that. And so I got involved with them. When I got my canoes, by that time I'd become president of our Rotary Club, and we needed a fundraiser. And I said, guys, I got 3 big canoes, if we can use them to raise money. So we created a corporate canoe races.
That's
with
so
those.
fun.
And started them there on Lake Wales. And to my knowledge, the first one's done in the state of Florida. And so we continue. Some of those continue. Actually, none continue in Lake Wales, but I do have one in Tallahassee that's still going on. And so that moved me then. As I progressed, I retired from Lake Aurora in 06, and so I got on the board of Circle of Friends at that time. And once I got on the board of Circle of Friends and started really getting network around people who thought differently than the neurotypical child or adult, and had difficulty in doing different things, I realized these guys think differently. The camps that I've been running won't work for them. Right. So that's when I said, well, I can start a camp for them. I can call it Camp Friendship. Now I should back up and say I had a little experience prior to that when I was still working at Lake Aurora. There's an organization in Polk County called TPA, Teen Pregnancy and Prevention Alliance. Okay. And I don't know if it still exists, but I know it did then. And they had put up a sign that I had to drive by every day, and that billboard they put up out on State Road 60 said it gave the statistics about every day, how many girls 15 years old or younger are having children or abortions or whatever, and are getting pregnant. And I'd drive by that sign, and one day it just hit me. I said, I can do something about that, because I know camping, and I know that we can change minds in camping through camping programs. So I went and contacted them And well, first I put together a little program, a little slideshow, and I showed it to my Rotary Club. And I had some educators in the Rotary Club, and they looked at it and they said, yeah, we want to do this. So then I found this TIPA organization. I went and made the little presentation. Next thing I knew, they were just all in on this thing. And so there's Polk County School Board, it was the YMCAs, it was everybody coming in on this thing. And so we called it Camp Open Door for 6th through 8th grade girls. And our whole mission was, let's show them, and we got a United Way grant to help us with it. So let's show them what the potential is if they would just make it through these teenage years to the other side. We'll show them the opportunities that are there out for them. So we created a very intentional program. Unfortunately, we only ran it 1 year. It was a great program, but we only ran it 1 year because it was dependent upon the leadership and all these agencies. Their leaders all wound up leaving, so the leadership that pulled that thing together left, and it wasn't something I could run by myself.
Right.
So that moved me into a different area of programming outside of the traditional church camp that I'd been running. And so when I took on Camp Friendship, I wasn't worried about trying something I'd never done before. That's what I've done all my life. And so we started that. That program's still going. Some other camps, though, that were also serving people with disabilities started renting the Lake Aurora property, and I started seeing what they were doing, and I realized, wow, they got a lot of obstacles. They have logistic issues they have to face.
Right. So
that's when I said, well, I can do something about that. So I started getting the equipment that they needed, that they didn't know they needed, and that just started another whole rolling for me. So, and that's the journey that I'm basically on now.
And that's incredible, because most would see all the great things that you were doing and see all the good that comes out of it, but you see the underside too of like, well, not everybody gets to enjoy these great things, and you say, well, if they can't enjoy them, I'm going to find another outlet for them and another resource. And I think that's incredible. It's a huge part of being a pioneer is, you know, not only seeing what works, but seeing what doesn't work and where we need to fill in those gaps. So that's fantastic. Let's talk a little bit more about removing the barriers, because I know that all of your other great initiatives are still running, but I know that is one that we're still definitely at the Lake Wales History Museum. We want to work together on more, so tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, and that came about because once I started working with these disability camps, I realized swimming in a lake wasn't working for them. Right. And I thought we got to have a swimming pool, and Lake Aurora there was always one on our master site plan, and but they weren't ready to take it on. So I said, well, can I take that on? They said, yeah, if you want to take it on. So I started the nonprofit Removing the Barriers Initiative with a basic mission to remove the barriers to great experiences for people with disabilities.
Wonderful.
Didn't know where it would go. It started with that pool, and then we said, well, we've got to have a lazy river, because the pool's not going to work for everybody. And I have an aquatics background, but it's a traditional aquatics background. I mean, I was a lifeguard instructor. I was a canoeing instructor, taught it at the college level. But this is different. Right. This is different. And so I had to start learning. And a lot of good opportunities in Florida to learn. So I just started learning and worked with Polk State College, and eventually a MBA team from Weber International University worked with us. We've had help from Florida International University helping us on this project. And so Removing the Barriers then focused on trying to create this aquatic experience that we didn't even know what to call it. But while we were doing that, what we'd done to help these camps get in these special golf cars, that cold wheelchairs, suddenly that opened up another whole world. So in the first world that opened up for us was the Polk Museum of Art, their Mayfair by the lake, because they were running their carts around, but none of them dealt with a person in a wheelchair unless that person could get out of the wheelchair and fold the wheelchair up. Right. And so we got our first cart with a grant, and I contacted them. So they said, yeah, bring it over. So we had our cart there. So for the first time, wheelchairs, you know, they didn't have to get out of their wheelchair. And,
incredible.
And as a result of that, removing the barriers, even today, is the accessible services provider for Mayfair by the Lake. And for Pioneer Days in Lake Wales, and which you're connected with or will be.
Yes.
And so we do that in different places around the state, literally around the state. And also use the big canoes that way, by the way. We were probably the first to ever do this, but we took one of the big canoes and a lady in a wheelchair. She actually was from Indiana, but she was coming down. Her friends wanted to take her in a canoe ride. And I had mentioned that when these big canoes, I said, I think I could even put a wheelchair in one of these things. Well, they challenged me on that. So we put her literally still in that wheelchair. We paddled to lunch on the Winter Haven chain of lakes.
That's amazing.
And it worked. And so then I started doing buddy paddles with the big canoes because I could put people side by side, and they're the safest paddlecraft made. And so still do that too. So anyway, so that removing the barriers, all these activities got a life of its own. Meanwhile, still trying to figure out how to do the stirring waters now. We eventually named this aquatic center Stirring Waters. We did that in 2013. And people ask me the question, Bill, you've been talking about this a long time. I've even talked about it here in this studio. You've been talking about it a long time. It's like, so why isn't anything happening? Well, I can give you a few reasons why, but things are happening. They just aren't happening at the speed that people want.
Right.
But first of all, I think the first thing we have to recognize is when you're taking on something that nobody's ever done before, and you've never done it before, there's a huge learning curve.
Exactly.
You think you know, you don't know.
And let's give a little background about that too, the Stirring Waters for this, because I know you've done an interview in here about that before. Give us a little background about what Stirring Waters is.
Well, the idea was, well, what do we need to do to give people with disabilities a fun aquatic experience? So it started with a pool. Then we said, well, the lazy river, because they can sit on a raft and they float the lazy river. And my thought was, well, the next Olympic gold medalist on a lazy river, all he's going to do is sit on a raft. And the person with a spina bifida or cerebral palsy, all they're going to do is sit on a raft. Right. Now suddenly they're equals, and they can enjoy it together. I thought, okay, well that's great. And then I got Polk State College involved with their health science department, with Dr. Nelson Marquez was leading it at that time, and their senior class made this their senior project. What would a water park look like that served people with disabilities? And they made their presentations, and wow, it was an eye opener for me. And so I realized there was a lot that needed to be learned. And then the greatest source of information comes from the families who are all living with disabilities. And so I was able to network with hundreds of families and do focus groups and listening to them, what worked for them, what doesn't work for them, what's difficult. And they have great problem-solving ideas. And so it's just this learning process. Now, the other thing that it takes to make these things work is money. I don't come from a corporate background. I don't come from a wealthy family background. For me, it's like, I don't worry about money. I know God's got all the money, but people control that money that He has.
Right.
And I'm thinking, well, okay, so I don't worry about what I can't solve, and but I solve on what I can. So I deal with the things I can do. So we've got the vision, and we started with my big canoes, with my canoeing background. In 2022, we did our first major fundraiser using those big canoes. Went all the way to the Missouri River. And we started right in Lake Wales, got a proclamation read by the city of Lake Wales.
That's amazing.
We had these special flags made. Lewis and Clark, we're going to follow part of their route. Lewis and Clark, when they went on their expedition, they had 15 flags made that had 15 stripes and 15 stars and had an eagle on it. None of these have survived. We only know from descriptions what was on there. So we took that eagle and we call these the peacemaker paddles.
Okay.
We still do peacemaker paddles. So we call that, and we put our logo on the eagle's chest, and then we handed these out. And we gave one here to Lake Wales. Then we started at Yankton, South Dakota. Well, the first one we gave was the National Park Service when we launched at Yankton. As we worked way down the river, Sioux City, we gave out flags, gave them to the Native Americans out there.
Wow.
And anyway, but we raised about $130,000 off of that paddle on the Missouri. Did a 5-day paddle, and that got us moving.
Okay.
We got another $100,000 grant because we did that, and then we did it the second year here in Florida on the Swanee. We raised about $90,000. Now this year we're going to do it again. This will be our third year. If anybody wants to paddle and raise money, because you got to raise money if you're a paddler, or you want to sponsor it. But this will be our third one, and we'll do it on the Swanee. Now we can't raise enough money to build this thing that way, but hopefully we will draw some attention to it. And there's somebody out there who cares about what we're trying to do enough to say, I can help. That's what I can do. I can help with the funding. They may not help with the vision, or maybe they will, but you know, that's the project, and that I enjoy it.
And you're doing amazing things. I think that is something so important, is again, you know, there's so many great things in the world, but not everybody always has those opportunities to enjoy them because of the accessibility issue. So again, you're removing that barrier. First it's a water park, who knows what it could be next. That's really exciting. So I know you have some fun pictures. So we went through one of your stories already, so we'll hopefully show that picture earlier in the segment, but let's go through some of your big memories since starting all of these projects, any noticeable mentions, I should say. Yeah, let's go through your big pillars. Okay,
let's see. Well, I'm going to start with the most recent and go backwards.
Yeah, please.
I am proud of these guys. This evolved from about 5 years ago. I was asked to go to Bach Academy.
Okay.
You know, Lake Wales started its own charter system. Broke off the Polk County school system, started their own charter school system, and several years ago. Well, Bach Academy is part of one of those charter schools, and some people that had worked at Lake Aurora with me had now gone and were teaching there.
Okay.
And so they had heard about Stirring Waters, and they invited me to come to their school just to talk to the students about Stirring Waters. And I remember being in a room that was so crowded, I hardly had a place to stand. And kids just surrounding me. And so I share with them the vision of Stirring Waters. And the school offered those kids, said, because they wear uniforms, so it said, on Wednesday you can, if you pay $1, make a $1 donation for Stirring Waters, you can dress down.
Oh, nice.
So they wound up, they were trying to raise $500. They had about 500 students. Well, they raised $1,000.
Wonderful.
Through that. Out of that then, within a couple weeks, I happened to be with my wife, who was teaching a class over at University of South Florida. I was in Tampa, and I got a call from one of the teachers at Bach who said, Bill, can you come by the farmer's market downtown Lake Wales? I said, no, I'm over in Tampa. And they said, well, there's some students here from Bach who have set up a bake sale raising money for Stirring Waters.
That's amazing.
They raised $1,000.
Wow.
Now, turns out that some of those students were now seniors in Lake Wales High School. And so the tallest young man right here, his story is that through removing the barriers, there was a man in Lake Wales named Barney Moore. People loved him, and but he was cerebral palsy in a wheelchair all of his life. First person in a wheelchair to graduate from Lake Wales High School.
Wow.
He's now was in his 60s, and he'd never been out on a boat fishing, and we arranged with another organization to bring over a special boat that he could just roll right into to take him out bass fishing.
Beautiful.
Well, he had to have a fisherman go with him, so a man by the name of Matt took him fishing. So, and Barney caught a really nice fish, a really nice fish.
Awesome.
It's a great picture. Well, out of that, Jedediah now, this is Matt's son.
Okay.
Jedediah loves to fish. He remembered the Bach Academy. He remembered what his dad did. So these are all IB students at the high school, and they had to do a project. He said, well, let's do a fishing tournament and raise money for Stirring Waters. These are high schoolers. So that's what they did, and so they did it, and they raised over $11,000 just a few weeks ago now.
See the impact you've had over time.
Yeah.
You don't even realize. That's so fantastic.
So those things smooth. So that, you know, but that's, you know, I love it when I see, I mean, I believe in youth, and I think they have tremendous potential, things I would have never thought about.
Let's share another one.
Okay, one of the things that I started when I was at Lake Aurora, I started them doing archery. But then as we began serving the camps for people with disabilities, archery ranges didn't work because they were in wheelchairs and they were off in the dirt. And I thought, well, we got to get a concrete pad, but also the sun shining down is a problem. So I actually approached Florida Fish and Wildlife Foundation with a proposal to build an adaptive archery range. And it seems that they were interested in two things. They were interested in, first of all, getting women into shooting sports. So they were funding things that got, this is with a license tag, the money from those license tags. And so we said, well, we've got women coming here, and we also can make this accessible to people with disabilities.
Right.
So they funded it. It was a multi-$1,000 grant, bought all the equipment, gave us all the money to build a shelter, the concrete pad. Lake Aurora worked with us. So we built this really nice adaptive archery range. We built it to the standards of the National Archery in Schools program, and so that it could be official if somebody wants to use it that way. And so this picture is at a women's retreat that was being held at Lake Aurora. So they had me come and teach archery to the women at the women's retreat.
That's wonderful.
And we've done it with some schools and things, so that's just one of the things that we do to work to, of course, all the camps that serve people with disabilities do that. And a great story about that. Through removing the barriers, somebody gave us what's called a paragolfer. And it's a special golf car that a person with disabilities can be in, and then it can stand them up to actually play golf. And so they'd given us one of those, and I thought, well, if it'll stand you up to play golf, maybe it'll stand you up to be able to shoot a bow.
Right.
So they were doing archery, and I took this out there, and this one young man in his 20s, I said, how would you like to stand up to be able to shoot? Well, he was excited, so we stood him up to shoot. He shot. Now everybody in a wheelchair, suddenly they wanted to stand up too. But we were fixing to let him down to transfer for the next one, and his mother happened to be there. She says, wait, don't put him down. Said, I want a picture. And she came over, and so we took a picture of he and his mother. It was the first time that she's ever had a picture of him standing up. And he's in his 20s.
That's beautiful.
So you just don't connect those things until you actually get in there doing something.
Exactly.
You don't go in planning those things. You just go in doing stuff, and those things just happen.
For other people that are watching this today, they're looking at you, seeing you amazing looking in your seat and all of your wonderful accomplishments. What advice would you give to somebody that would want to be sitting in the seat where you are? What is some inspiration or advice to maybe get to the point where you are, where you found your mission, and to make an impact, and how can other people get involved?
That's a complicated question for me. I don't know the answer to that. I only know for me, I just followed my opportunities. And I'm going to take this all the way, circle back to when I was a high schooler attending Lake Aurora Christian Camp in Lake Wales. And when I made that intentional decision that I wanted to serve my life with ministry, there was no expiration date on it. So here I am, 84, doing stuff I've never done before, and being happy doing it. And it's just, that's just me. I don't know how anybody else gets here.
And I think that you hit the nail on the head and you answered the question for me. It's really just following your heart, finding your inspiration, and anyone can be a pioneer. It's just getting started and following through intention and seeing where people need assistance or where missions need to grow. And I think that you've done just that. So thank you. Every time I get to talk to you, I get to learn a little bit more about you. So it's such a pleasure. And congratulations on becoming this year's Pioneer of the Year.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to just share my heart. Thank you.
Of course. Thank all of you for being here today. I appreciate your time. And my name's Angela Rosado, again with the Lake Wales History Museum. Thank you again to the Polk County Historical Society and PGTV for having us here today.